And I wonder if you could
Yeah.
comment on the usual objections that come up against those, which tend to be people are selfish and they don't care about others. How can we reconfigure people's ideas of what the game is that they're playing?
Yeah, so you're asking questions that to really deconstruct a lot of our ideas around evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology and what we think of as human nature genetically and economic theory, and then adequately reconstruct new things would take enough time that, since I'm not going to get to do it, I'm going to just push buttons of all of those. I think that we have got human conditioning that is actually relatively new, but that has become very ubiquitous because it was successful in a win-lose game theoretic structure, and it's so ubiquitous that we've done pretty much all of our social science within that context, and so we stop factoring the context and call it human nature.
Right.
We've done almost all of our social sciences within capitalism. We've done almost all of it within nation states, right? Within those kinds of structures. Done it within win-lose game theory in a mostly post-industrial, definitely post-agrarian world. Most of the history of our species is pre-agrarian. Definitely pre-nation state. And pre-agrarian also meant pre-capital, pre-private ownership of surplus, because there was no fucking surplus. And so there's a totally different relationship to those things. So, and then we say, okay, well, the way that we're behaving, since it's ubiquitous, must be nature rather than nurture. So then let's try and look for the genes that correlate and make it a genetic answer. And this is where I think our biases lead to bad science. So I won't go further down there, but I will say that most of what we call inalienable human nature, I think, is our nature expressed through a certain set of conditions, and different enough conditions can have what is nature expressed differently. Now, I'm going to come back and say the whole nature, nurture, what is fundamentally possible to the human condition, we can ask a thought experiment about it that's different than we've been able to ask previously, because CRISPR is making the conversation of human genetic engineering a real, not that far off, possible conversation, right? It's a big fucking deal, because if we say, okay, well, maybe there is something that is genetic, and maybe we can change those genes, then it brings up instantly, now we're in deep existentialism around, oh, if we can actually change something that we thought of as nature, what is fundamentally desirable outside of what we thought was a fixed context?
Right.
Do we want to then change the genes where everyone is a hyper competitor? Do we, and they're the most violent and largest alpha men possible only? Do we want to make it to where now alphas are irrelevant and everyone is a super cooperator? Do we want to make it to where people are happy all the time? And we have done the abolitionist imperative and got rid of the ability to suffer and feel pain? Or do we, are there evolutionary and psychological purposes that stay relevant to, now we're in a very deep existential philosophic place, and it's important that we go there. Now, as soon as we can start to, ask those questions, then we can come back to, okay, well, here are some things that are meaningful about the human condition. What of them might actually be possible even without the genetic engineering? But it does make us start thinking that what we have thought of as human nature, that was a hard, unfixed limit, we can at least think about it more flexibly, which I think is a useful thought experiment. But if you have a situation where there's a lot of shitty jobs, right? Like tarring roads is just not that fun, and et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't mean that nobody would never want to go do some tarring of a road or different kinds of labor or different kinds of rote tasks, but most people wouldn't want to do 50 hours of it a week for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
And yet the society has needed people to do a bunch of that shit. And so when you then see people as the vector for getting societal things done, you have to have an extrinsic motive system to get people to do it. So if we all pool our resources and then make sure everybody has resources, we call it communism, then why would anyone do the shitty jobs? Well, now the state has to force them, so we call it imperialism, and that's why we don't like communism. I'm radically oversimplifying, of course, but that's like at the heart of the argument. So then we say, cool, let's let the free market force people because that's better. So the state's not going to force people, but they don't get any basic needs met. So if they don't go do one of the shitty jobs, they starve. Now we'll say that they have the freedom to get better education and hopefully not have to do the shitty jobs. But of course, it's not a real argument since a lot of people are going to have to do the shitty jobs because somebody has to, right? And those who are born into families where someone else was doing it have a lot less likelihood to have access to good education and good health care and good training. And so in a situation where the default is having nothing, you need to get stuff to just survive, bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. But now surviving doesn't give me the next levels of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like my belonging, the more shit that I get, the more I'll be able to actually get relationships and do things with friends that have the resources to do stuff, and my esteem, all the way up to my self-actualization. The more that I can get shit, the more capacity I have to self-express and do, and like that, every level of Maslow's hierarchy. If I want it, and we value the scarce shit where you having something, then you don't have access to it, like a shopping cart. You have possession of it, where when you're not using it, I still can't use it. And so because you possessing some scarce thing there's not enough of for everybody means that I don't have access, we're in fundamental competition with each other, right? And if there's something that's abundant enough that you having it doesn't decrease my access at all, like air, we put no economic value at all on it because there's no ability to have differential advantage associated with getting some of the scarce thing. And because we put no economic value on the air, we'll pollute the shit out of it and burn it up because it doesn't enter our economics calculus that is the basis of our decision making. But we'll work really hard to get the gold or the diamond or whatever it is that we perceive as scarce enough that if I have it, gives me some differential advantage over you. But then I'm going to take that gold or diamond and put it in a safe that is doing nothing for anyone other than a fiat purpose, right? And then because it's scarce, this is important to get, because the value is proportional to the scarcity, because we're not looking for systemic advantage, we're looking for differential competitive advantage, which is assumed. If the thing became unscarce, it would have no value, like air. So as soon as we start finding that diamonds aren't as scarce as we thought they were, we start burning and crushing and hiding them, right?
Yeah.
Because now we need to artificially manufacture scarcity. So when you have a system where if you don't get shit, you die. And if you don't get more shit, you don't get to express very well. And anyone else getting shit means you don't have it. And win-lose dynamics everywhere. Like, if I wanted to condition greed and selfishness and jealousy into people as best I could, that's how the fuck I would do it.
This is how you train people to be that.
Exactly. And if I wanted to train people to be psychopaths, right? Not like I put them through enough first-person childhood trauma or they have the right kind of brain injuries or genes for formal psychopathy, but I want to decrease their empathy pretty radically and their ability to rationalize harm. Well, I would do things like capitalism and large, and then the evolutions of capitalism that happen, corporate capitalism, where if you aren't willing to participate in something that's going to have externalities, you just don't get to run a big company. If you're running a big company, you've got to say, yeah, shit, well, those mines are run by slave labor, but like there's just no other mines, and if we tried to pay for fair trade, we'd be totally out of business, so you got to like crack some eggs to make some omelets. Just even being able to participate with a system that isn't closed loop, that doesn't actually value all the metrics that it affects, requires rationalizing harm and having a kind of abstracted psychopathy. So, we have a system that you can think of as conditioning low-grade ubiquitous psychopathy in everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do social science on it, and we call it human nature.